Alright, so in this installment of Watching Every Studio Ghibli Movie, we are once again checking out a piece of media that was made by key Ghibli staff members before the company was founded, the 1972 and 1973 pair of short films Panda Go Panda, or Panda Go Panda. Spoiler warning as always, let's get on with it. Okay, so Panda Go Panda might be the biggest, pleasantest surprise out of any of the films I've watched in this series. I'll be honest, I was kinda expecting to not really like these movies all that much. First of all, Isao Takahata directed them, and that's obviously not a bad sign on its own. Takahata has some amazing films which I've grown to love even more than when I first saw them, particularly Grave of the Fireflies and Only Yesterday, but he's also directed multiple mediocre films. Again, just my opinion. If you want my full thoughts on any of them, check out those respective reviews. But the thing is, now that I've seen a lot of his work, I'd characterize his style as extremely contemplative. He's a much more reserved director than Miyazaki, and this style, at its best, results in some of the most emotionally relatable and resonant films in the entire Ghibli catalog. But at worst, can be kinda boring, and given that all I knew about this film was that it was about a family with talking pandas, I was worried it would just be an hour of slow conversations about how pandas are going extinct because humans are tearing down all their bamboo and building infrastructure. You know, all that classic Ghibli environmentalism stuff. But Panda Go Panda is anything but boring. First of all, Miyazaki was a lot more involved than I initially understood. Apparently, he did some of the initial story or character conception, and Takahata was like, oh, this is a great idea, I'll lead it to fruition, because Miyazaki has never directed a project this big on his own before. So Panda Go Panda is way more focused on the moment-to-moment enjoyability of the film, and in yet another extremely pleasant surprise, that entails being an outright comedy. And I'm being completely sincere when I say this, Panda Go Panda is one of the funniest anime I've ever seen. And this is largely because of just how utterly strange and unpredictable it is on a moment-to-moment basis. A lot of the time, it's the way the voice actors are just making way over-the-top noises, like when the father panda eats bamboo, or it's the bizarre sound effects they throw in seemingly completely haphazardly, like when the police officers see the pandas through the window for the first time and they literally play a wow 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 sound effect. Or it's just the things that the characters say, like the way their brains seem to process information is endlessly entertaining. Like in the first episode when a townsman says to Mimiko, the main girl, hey, you're gonna be home alone, aren't you scared some burglars might come by? And Mimiko just goes, wow, I've never seen burglars in real life before, I'd love to meet some. It's so funny. Oh yeah, and then there's just the way the father panda just has this borderline horrifying 1,000-mile stare half the time. And like, obviously these films do not have the budget to animate the characters in excessive detail like later Ghibli works, so there's lots of cuts where the father panda is just completely motionless for a little longer than it seems like he should be. Wide smile, eyes frequently pointed in different directions, it's so funny. It genuinely feels like modern post-irony memes sometimes. And while I'm on the topic of the lower budget and production value of this film, I will say that, of course, I'd love to see these characters and environments animated by modern Ghibli, but the choppy animation, simplistic artwork, and small narrative scope is a lot of what brings Panda Go Panda its appeal. This is gonna sound like a non sequitur, but you know Quentin Tarantino, super famous film director, Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill, Django Unchained? Well, all of his movies are super ambitious in scope and they have some of the most recognizable actors of all time attached to them. They feel like Hollywood movies, all except his very first film, Reservoir Dogs, which was made before Tarantino got really well known in the industry, so he didn't have the reputation to pull big names or the budget to do anything particularly ambitious. And I love Reservoir Dogs because it's the one existing example of what a low-budget Tarantino film looks like. When all the bells and whistles are unavailable, you get to see what the artist is forced to focus on. If they only have the resources to perfect one thing, what is that one thing they choose to perfect? I think this is a recipe that most acutely brings the unique personality of an artist to the surface. Reservoir Dogs, for example, takes place 90% in one location, an old empty warehouse, because they didn't have the money to shoot hardly anywhere else. So nearly the entire story is conveyed through dialogue, and that dialogue is some of the best in all of cinema, if you ask me. And if you ask any Tarantino head what makes a Tarantino movie, they'll inevitably bring up the masterful dialogue. Anyway, bringing this back to the film this video is supposed to be about, in the same way that Reservoir Dogs is the one living example of a Tarantino film on a noticeable budget, Panda Co. Panda is the one example of a Studio Ghibli project on a noticeable budget. I mean, I assume so. I haven't seen Future Boy Conan yet, but you could probably say much of the same things about it. Panda Co. Panda is like if you trimmed away all the fat, all the muscle even, from a regular Ghibli production, leaving only the bones, only the fundamental stuff that is so core to the personality of Studio Ghibli. And when that's all that's left, it becomes super easy to recognize. Like, the pandas are obviously a prototype of Totoro from My Neighbor Totoro. Mimiko is obviously a prototype of basically every Ghibli girl, but especially Nausicaä and Kiki, what with her independent and self-assured personality and feline companion. And also, I was so excited when this happened, but the flooding of the house and the town existing as the most obvious direct precursor to the scene in Ponyo that planted the obsession with underwater locations that would normally not be underwater in my brain. Again, check out the Ponyo video for elaboration, but like, it happened in Ponyo, it happened in Lupin the Third, it happened in Panda Co. Panda. This is a Ghibliism now. Please don't take this away from me, I love this trope so much. Another thing I noticed as a real strength of these films that carries over into other Ghibli works was the sound design, and I already mentioned how effective it was at conveying comedy for me because of how just strange and unexpected its tendencies were. But that also lends it that classic Ghibli feeling of supernaturalism existing in the world around us. When you hear this magical sounding little jingle or synth note played over a mundane activity like a child doing a joyful handstand, it reminds you that there is magic in those everyday moments of joy. It encourages you to recognize the magic and wonder that is so often portrayed on the screen out in the real world. And having seen as many movies from the Ghibli team as I have now, I'd say that that attitude is as close to a guiding philosophy towards all of their productions as you can get. Alright, I'm getting too sentimental. Let's talk about some more random stuff. So, as much as I love the performances from the voice actors and actresses, they did suffer from what I consider to be the one strictly negative aspect of this movie, which is the recording quality. I hope that not all distributions of Panda Co. Panda are like this, but the copy I watched had audio levels peaking pretty regularly, namely from the voice actors. I was very worried when in like the first minute, Mimiko is screaming at the top of her little 7-year-old lungs and just frying my eardrums. And it gets better, but it's still not great. Speaking of Mimiko, I am absolutely convinced she was directly inspired by Pippi Longstocking. I don't even need anyone to confirm this in the comments, I am so confident in this. She looks exactly like Pippi Longstocking and acts very similar to renditions of her I experienced as a kid. Also, interesting thing about Mimiko, which sorta builds upon the appeal of this film as a low-budget Ghibli, is the way she almost always moves with this absence of momentum. Like I said, the animation is choppy, but that gives it its charm. And all of the ways we see Mimiko running up and down and all around and flipping and jumping, etc. just reminds me of how in Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind, Nausicaä would occasionally animate a little choppily. Specifically in the scene where she's running up several flights of stairs and how she would turn corners on a dime with no build-up or follow-through. It's the type of style that Mimiko is animated in all the time, which makes it feel like an aesthetic choice, whereas in Nausicaä, it felt a bit like a wrinkle that would be ironed out in later films. Also, does anyone know where I can find the music that is played in the scene of the main characters boating over the flooded town? I absolutely loved it and I couldn't find it anywhere. Anyway, conclusion time, I had a blast with Panda Co. Panda. Like I said, it was a very pleasant surprise, and I think I'm gonna give this one an 8 out of 10. I don't really know what Ghibli-related movies I can still check out. Even Panda Co. Panda feels like it's approaching the limit of what could be considered part of the Ghibli pantheon. I've heard that Mary and the Witch's Flower has a lot of Ghibli staff members on it, as well as The Red Turtle and some other stuff. If you have any suggestions of movies it would be appropriate to include in this video series, please let me know, but until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.